Hi everyone, my name's Laurie from the University of St Andrews from the School of Geography and Sustainable Development, and it's my great pleasure to be here with you today to talk on the topic of Amazonian journeys, making culture matter for climate change. And I'm here in my hallway, in my house, in front of this amazing wall map that I rescued from a university lecture theatre that was being done up about 10 years ago. And this was actually the map that when I was an undergraduate student all those years ago, that I came back from fieldwork in Peru as a second year keeny beanie, and I used to sit right in front of this map and look at the places that I used to go to, and I have to say sometimes pay less attention than maybe I should have done to my lectures. But that's just to show you that this enduring passion I have for South America and Peru has been with me for about 3 decades. And when I talked to you, I wanted you to have this picture behind me of the amazing extent of what the Amazon looks like. And just to say, for me, working in Amazonia has been a sort of a relatively recent thing. Prior to this, I worked mainly in highland Peru, in the shanty towns as well, and I also work in coastal Peru. And I suppose the Amazonian thing really came about by moving to St Andrews and starting to work with physical geography colleagues. So this project and what I'm presenting today draws on that joint work, and it focuses specifically in the context of climate change on tropical peatlands. Now, peatlands cover only about 3% of the planet's land surface, but they actually hold twice as much carbon of all the Earth's standing forests and about 1/3 of the Earth's organic soil carbon. And when I first came to St Andrews, it was my physical geography colleagues who were first involved in a team that were mapping what's called intact tropical peatlands in an area known as the Pastaza Marañón Foreland Basin in Peru. And you can see this here on the map of the Amazon Basin. It's number 1 on your map. So this is an area, unlike in Southeast Asia, of intact peatlands which are still under the ground and haven't been commercially exploited or drained. And so this work is collaborative work that they first started several years ago as part of the Tropical Wetland Consortium that combines St Andrews, Leeds and Edinburgh scholars working with the Institute of Amazonian Studies in Peru. Now this is a sort of a government research institute, and they have a base in Iquitos, and that's whom we were working with. And we've been really fortunate in this interdisciplinary endeavour to be funded by the Livelihoods Trust for a project called Valuing Amazonian Peatlands, and also from the Scottish Funding Council. That was a pilot work for my engagement with this work around, as a social scientist, as a human geographer, looking more on the indigenous livelihoods and the social economic dimensions of how people living in peatland areas value them. So this then, in the next sort of wee while, is going to be me reflecting very personally and to some extent in more informally than I would in a sort of a more scientific paper on my experience of a journey that I made in February 2019 on the Chambira River. Now, as I said, I've been working in Peru for well over 30 years, but this was really the first time I had gone deep into Amazonia and on a 2-week river trip way up the Chambira River. And I'm going to tell you a bit about why we did that and what we were aiming to do, and then I'm going to talk about a return journey made by people in the indigenous communities of that area that we ended up working with. So here then is the team of people who went on that journey in February 2019. In the middle is my colleague from YAP, Manolo Brañas, and also to his left is Margarita, the field assistant, also from YAP. And also in the picture is Cecilia, so both the other side of him, who at the time worked for YAP. And interestingly, also in the picture, in the blue shirt, not me, is Rosario, who at the time was working for the Ministry of Intangible Culture in Peru. So she came with us on this journey, along with Emanuele there behind, who is an anthropologist based at the Catholic University in Peru, who's worked a lot in this area with the Urarina indigenous people, who I'm going to talk about, and also Luis Andesa there at the back, who is our postdoctoral research fellow on this journey. And I'll also just want to mention my other colleagues working with me in St Andrews on this. The person in charge of the project is Katie Ruku, working closely with Ian Lawson, Althea Davis, and also Lydia Cole. And towards the end of my talk, I'll share with you some of the stuff that they've been doing on a more public engagement front. So this was us on the launch, leaving a place called Nauta and going up towards the Chambera River on these small launches. And we went for days, and we stayed in communities, and we were away for nearly 2 weeks. So what was the purpose of this trip then? Well, this trip was about basically what Manolo is doing there in the picture, which was about trying to talk to the indigenous communities further up the Chambera River than my colleagues had worked before, to talk to them about the possibilities of them consenting to us to work with them on trying to understand their uses, their sustainable uses of the peatlands, with a view to sort of trying to work out how peatlands can be managed sustainably by learning from indigenous management of those areas, as a way to try to build some sort of protection for those areas. So it was about getting consent, prior informed consent. This is something you need under Peruvian law, and it's also obviously something that ethically we support strongly. But interestingly, very few people in the communities we were talking to are actually bilingual. Very few of them speak Spanish, and some of the men speak Spanish, but very few are literate. So here is this picture of the guys giving their permission to participate in our project. But at the same time, over to the left of Manolo speaking, was a collection of women, all with their backs turned to the speakers and to the men. And so the communities that we were working with have a very distinct gender set of relations around how they organise their society, but also how they manage community land. So the women are very much involved in harvesting certain things that I'll come on to in a minute from the palm swamps that we looked at, but also engaged in small gardens and producing subsistence crops. So although it looks like the men were participating, everything, and the women were knitting, everything is a joint decision and is discussed within household units. So basically the message is, don't take from appearances what you first see, that the men are engaged and the women are have their backs to the situation. And we saw this the further we went up to along the Chambera River, that community prior consent meetings involve both men and women and children, but they each sat in separate spaces. So why were we going on this journey? And this is Julio, one of the YAP field assistants, who, when we got to the first place we were going, a place called 20 de Enero, which is just within a national park in the Loreto area where we were working, he took me out on a trip because I really wanted to see the pink dolphins more up close from the Amazon, the sort of tourist shot. Unfortunately, I was so staggered by actually looking at them that I forgot to take you a picture. But why were we? Why were we going on this? This is basically one of the first places that, as far as the Amazonian tourist boats get in this region. But obviously we were not there as tourists, although we did very much enjoy the views, particularly on the river. The time actually walking in peatlands is slightly more stressful and challenging. So why were we there then? Well, because some previous work that we'd conducted, not with me in the field, there was one of our field researchers, Dr. Christopher Schultz, working with our Peruvian colleagues, who went in 2018. And this pilot work was funded by the Scottish Funding Council Global Challenge Funds. And it visited the community of Nueva Unión, as you can see here, which looks pretty well like paradise. And what Christopher is doing in this picture here is he conducted a whole series of interviews, and he went on local mapping to map the vegetation and talk with the members of Nueva Unión about how they manage the peatlands and what the vegetation's is going on there. And what we were basically doing was trying to find out how they managed the ecosystem, how they understood the ecosystem, and whether their understanding of peatlands was similar to that of us as scientists. And the take-home message really from this work is that the indigenous Eurarina knowledge nuances our understandings of tropical peatlands ecosystems. And if we're seeking to preserve these peatlands, to keep carbon capture within peatlands and basically a carbon sink and not dry these out and therefore contribute to climate change, then we need a much better understanding of how indigenous people already manage and understand those peatlands. So we have a couple of papers out based on that work, that field work that Christopher did with our YAP colleagues Manolo and Cecilia, and also building on the work with the botanists in YAP as well, on identifying different types of ecosystems. And you can see here in this slide that one of them is called a hiri, and that it's basically small lakes and pond areas, and areas of grasses and sedges, and also something called pole forests, and that's an image of it that you can see there. So quite open, and it's used by them also for building and for hunting. But a second one that we became most interested in is the Alaka ecosystem. So in our understanding, this would just be palm forests, and what their understandings have brought is a more nuanced take on how the different parts of the peatland ecosystem both develop and what they're used for. And the Alaka system is dominated by these aguaje palm trees. And I will tell you now, I have so much respect for physical geographers. I'm a human geographer. I talk to people. I've worked in some pretty challenging environments in Peru, including in civil war, etc. But walking in a tropical peatland in the stinking heat, getting water in your wellies, falling over is not actually my favourite thing to do. And this picture looks beautiful, but it's hot, it's sticky, and you're being bitten all the time. So for me, it was really quite challenging fieldwork. And what people do as scientists, including paleoecologists who take samples of the peat and look at the pollen, is they spend long times in these situations and setting up sample sites, etc. So doing fieldwork with my colleagues, basically hats off to them, is what I came away from that interdisciplinary experience thinking. But this is, if you like, the treasure. This is the aguaje fruit that people forest. Now, one of the things that YAP have been engaged in is trying to encourage people to harvest aguaje fruits without chopping down the palm trees, because it is quite easy to fell a palm tree and get this very lucrative crop, which is high in antioxidants. It sells as a juice and is sold on to Iquitos. Currently, there isn't much of a market beyond the jungle area for this product, but some drinks companies are interested in working with it. And there's a famous chef in Peru who's also has it on his menu of sustainable products from this area of the Peruvian jungle. And so the idea then is to understand how people are using this, but also how they can carry on maintaining the aguaje palm in place, and also to encourage people to use the forest sustainably and not chop down the palms. Now, what are the other uses of the palms, and why is that sustainable management that is the dominant current form of management? Why is that important? Well, the other thing that comes from these palms is this fibre. So this fibre is harvested by the women from the aguaje palm leaves, and they use local dyes in order to produce different colours. And this is a textile. You can see all those beautiful natural colours in the textile. And these textiles are used on the floor. They're also used as mats, and they're used also in the weaving of hammocks for babies, etc. So that then is why we were interested in this. We wanted to find out, based on Christopher's earlier work and our colleagues Manolo and Cecilia and Margarita, what more sustainable ways that this area could be managed. So I was really excited to return in 2019 to Nueva Unión and then go further afield to try to start to work with Ororina communities further at a greater distance from Nueva Unión. And we got there, and I was massively excited. That beautiful picture of that green had been replaced by basically flooded bits of plastic. And what had happened is that the community relocated from Nueva Unión, New Union, to a new site, Nueva Unión, New Union. And the reason they did this is because they were seeking compensation from the oil company for historical oil spillages in their area, and also because the oil company were prospecting new sites that would be on their land, and they had been promised certain development advantages like a house clinic and schools, etc. Now, the Ororina are also, they do move, so every sort of 10 years or so, they're not nomadic, but they do move communities as well. So this movement per se was not unusual, but leaving their hunting grounds, leaving where they could harvest aguaje, where they could have their gardens, and moving to a completely flooded side of a river nearer to where the main oil company was located was really a radical shift for them. And they moved very, very quickly, almost overnight, into a moneyed economy, whereas before they'd been able to harvest for their own goods. So that pipeline there that you see in the picture is the pipeline that takes the oil from northern Peru all the way to the coast to a place called Bayova, and it's there exported. And in a paper that we're currently writing on the crossover between peatlands, tropical peatlands and oil production in the global south, we've identified, that's being led by my colleague Ian Lawson, we've identified that 200 kilometres of the northern pipeline in Peru actually crosses over the peatlands. And between 2011 and 2019, there were 192 oil spills recorded. Now, obviously, there will be some that were also missed, because this is a very extensive area, and that is the equivalent of 17,760 barrels. So, therefore, the search for compensation for that has produced this movement of people. And that has given extra emphasis to us as a research team to try to work with the Ororina community to make more visible the sustainable ways in which they manage the peatlands, and also to ensure that they can secure sustainable livelihoods. So then, what are we doing, particularly as the St Andrews part of the team, of the wider team of Edinburgh and also Leeds? What are we doing as sustainable development researchers to help address this challenge? Well, the first is we are writing academic papers looking at this overlap between peatlands and oil production, because there's been very little that has engaged specifically with that. But more importantly, I think, from my perspective, is that we're working have been working with our partners in YAP to support an application from the Ororina people themselves to gain intangible cultural heritage status. Now, this is a status whereby they, as an Indigenous people, based on an element of their culture, can receive some sort of formal protection and recognition from the Peruvian government, who in turn are part of the UNESCO set-up and way of monitoring cultural heritage. Okay, so this is where I turn to the second journey along the Chambira River that occurred in December 2020. December 2019. We were all doing something else in December 2020. And this is basically a journey that was undertaken by 3 extended Orerina families, supported by YAP, upon receiving their formal intangible cultural heritage. There was a presentation of this heritage, the certificate and everything that they were given, and they were given it particularly because of the textiles that women produce. This was seen as a unique piece of intangible cultural heritage, and they were given it in Lima at an indigenous artisan fair that I'm now going to talk about. But just before I give you some of the details of that, I just want to say that, you know, for many of us, intangible cultural heritage is a really difficult concept to grasp due to its immaterial and abstract nature. We all know that buildings, physical things, are cultural heritage, but there is a lot of debate in the museum studies literature and in courses such as art history on the difference between tangible and intangible heritage. So intangible heritage is often regarded as memories or knowledge, skills and traditions, but it can also include artifacts such as the textiles, places or musical instruments that are recognised by a community as an inseparable part of their cultural heritage. So it's the sort of intangible elements of the emotion and the value that's put on these textiles that make them worthy of an application for intangible cultural heritage in the Peruvian system. And as I said, this was granted, and our research, along with our colleagues YAP, fed into that process. Okay, so they had to make a formal application, and we were able to provide some of our research findings to help shape that. So as a result, they were invited and funded by the Ministry of Culture in Peru to attend this twice yearly meeting of indigenous artisans in Lima, whereby indigenous people come together in a big like hall, and for a week they display their goods and they sell them and they make links. And this is called Rora Agemaki, so, and also made by hand. And it's an amazing event. As I said, it happens twice yearly. The Orerina communities went in to the December one, and here you can see one of the Orerina women actually setting out the loom that they used to weave on with the help of Manolo in the display. And the Orerina women have these very distinctive red and purple clothing. And interestingly, the big textile there at the front is called an ila, and but what they did specifically for this event is they also produced smaller items in greater quantity, jewellery and the baskets, because they thought that they would be more attractive to the public coming. So both other indigenous people from all over Peru, as well as tourists and resident Lima people. But what I want to flag up is that actually this is also a really interesting intercultural space, and this is the next thing that we're interested in working on, because this is a space where, as I've suggested, people come from all over Peru, and for these people from Nueva Unión, for the first time, for certainly the women, it was the first time they'd even been to the nearest town of Iquitos, let alone in an aeroplane, and let alone into the metropolitan, modern, urban, huge megalopolis that is Lima, okay? And, you know, they'd never seen the sea. So this was a major cultural step for them, and a journey of several days. But equally important in terms of their cultural step and the role of cultural heritage in the broader picture of climate change. In this context, we're talking about heritage as a way to protect peatlands, was the exchange with other indigenous peoples. Now, if any of you have ever been to Peru, the couple on the right are from a place called Pisac, and they're, which is in highland Peru, near Cusco. They're Quechua people, and this is sort of quite an iconic a place to visit for tourists, and they have very famous textiles. And so here what we're seeing is an exchange between highland and lowland Peruvians, talking about the different techniques they use, what they have, how they have spun, how they've woven. And this conversation here between this woman, the two women weavers, we're actually talking about the different types of techniques for weaving. And you can see here, this tourist is also taking an understanding from the Ororina woman about what other products they sell, what other sorts of exchanges there are. So this also is an intercultural moment, because this is an exchange between mestizo, white, middle-class Peruvians and indigenous people from Loreto, who otherwise are not really very much known about in the wider context of Peru. I absolutely love this picture. Because you can see the display in the background, but you can see the guy from Pisac on the left, and also a guy from another Highland indigenous community, and his partner on the right, looking in detail at the types of thread. Now, there was a lot of exchange that was really important, but also the thing that is quite interesting to my colleagues Manolo and Margarita and myself and Althea is the fact that within this certain geographies also play out. So there's often a portrayal of jungle areas as being behind and backward, and more backward than the highlands, including amongst indigenous alliances, okay? And so some of the discussion around here was that oh, well, your way of weaving isn't actually as sophisticated as ours. Yours is quite primitive. So I don't want to portray this space as just, you know, a complete celebration of interculturalism. Within that, there's also elements of discrimination and sort of pushing some people further away. So and that's stuff that we're currently working on as well with our colleagues in YAP. So I want to finish by also letting you know of something else that we've been doing. This has been led by my colleagues Katie Ruku, Lydia Cole and Althea Davis, sort of ecology and paleoecology people. This is me last weekend at the Botanical Gardens in St Andrews, and what my colleagues have done, the best of us have just been sort of also around supporters, reading the text and maybe picking up on typos and helping to frame, you know, the central message. But they did a huge amount of work on this, again in collaboration with our YAP colleagues, on producing an exhibition on tropical peatlands as part of the lead up to COP. And this is me by one of the pictures, and I love it because they actually put them on tatty boxes all at the bottom of the Botanical Gardens. And some of my students went and they looked at the exhibition and compared it with a couple of readings that we had set the second year. So this is sort of sub-honours, people who haven't necessarily, whether they've decided they're geographers or not. And they had to make a short podcast on relating the readings about climate change and scale to what they saw in the exhibition, and got some really interesting stuff there. And there were kids running around, and there were also adults walking down to it. And I leave you with this picture that is by Lydia called Reflections. You can see the level of the flooding. You can see where it's white. That's where the last flood got to. So this area, the peatlands are seasonally flooded, and understanding how people use these peatlands in the context of seasonal flooding is really important. And that is also why, as part of the exhibition, Katie, Althea and Lydia have also produced a virtual exhibition, and there will be links to that as well, and there's various resources for teachers, but also to engage kids. So I just wanted to finish with that because that gives you an idea of what this amazing area behind me in this map actually looks like on the ground. And part of what we're doing in this work is trying to ensure that it can stay that way and that it can maintain a place of sustainable livelihoods for the Ororina indigenous people, and that we can learn from the ways in which they maintain and manage the peatlands. So thank you very much, and I really look forward to your questions.